Hello, my name is Christopher Knight. Today I'm going to talk with you about Virginia Hamilton Adair, and more specifically her poem God to the Serpent. A little bit about Miss Adair first. She was born in 1913 in the Bronx. Her father was a poet and read to her basically from birth, and she composed her first poem at the age of 2, which I thought was impressive. Even more impressive was that she was writing poetry regularly by the age of 6. In the 1930s and 1940s, she was published in various magazines and newspapers, things like that. And then she vanished from being all published, anything published for 50 years. During that 50 years, she actually became a professor of English at California State Polytechnic University. She got married and then she had raised 3 children. Later on, after she became more famous, in an interview, she said that the reason she had taken that time there was because she, cared more about raising the kids and her career as a teacher and learning, than she did being published. She also said that she felt like writing to be published took something away from her work, that she didn't want to write to please someone else, she wanted to write to please herself. Um, and then, when she was 83 years old, her first book was published in 1996, and that's Ants on the Melon, and that was her biggest work, her biggest, or her most accepted work. It, people liked it. It's the one out of the 3 that she has published that was really, truly, a huge success. The other 2, Beliefs and Blasphemies and Living on Fire, a collection of poems, published in 1998 and 2000, weren't as accepted as much, nearly as well. From what I could gather, the reason for this was, because the Ants on a Melon was more of a mix of things that she'd written throughout the years, more about, trying to get like, hey, this is who I am, wide variety of different styles, things like that. Whereas the other 2 kind of, went down like a kind of more of a more simple or single style, or didn't branch out as much as the first one did. um, she's also said to have more of a, in all of her works there, she's said to have more of a classical feel, even though she was being published in the 90s. And that's because and that's for various reasons there. But she's not considered as a huge modern poet, like the style at least. Moving on, I'm moving on to the well, actually before we get to God, go to the Serpent. I want to point out that after you know a little bit about her life, it's actually hard not to see how her life would affect some of the things she wrote. Um, her husband ended up walking into their son's bedroom and killing himself. And then before her first book was published, she actually had gone blind from glaucoma. And one of those is enough to make somebody say, "Hey, what's going on, God?" or "Why, God, why?" But to have both of those things happen to you, it's just especially like a suicide, that always leaves people that you love behind wondering, what's going on. It always leaves that hole there, and it's hard not to see that in some of her work because she's known for taking a different spin on biblical stories or segments from the Bible, and you'll see more about that, in God to the Serpent. And then just a couple before we actually jump into God to the Serpent there, just to give you some of the highlights from it. The tone you'll see actually shifts. It starts off as more like a praise to the serpent, and it shifts to more of a scorn of man. Like someone's like, "Hey, I'm happy," and then anger, and and you'll see what I mean. We'll talk about it more whenever we get there. There is no specified setting. Personally, I picture it in like the Garden of Eden or just the woods or the forest or something like that. Uh, when I looked up it online, to see if anybody else had, to see what else other people had thought about the poem and things like that. There was all kinds of various, it could be here, it could be there, and there's really no hard setting nailed down, in the poem itself. Um, the speaker of the poem is obviously God. It says so in the title. We see that God's talking to a serpent. Um, you know, the theme for me, this one has a couple different things that could be considered the theme. It really depends on the individual on that. For me, it was the duality of good and evil, the snake, and the good duality of man. And you'll see, and we'll talk more about that as we get into the poem, but you'll see what I mean. The other one, another one that I saw, it wasn't my original thought there, but kind of went in there too, is the choices of man. versus how the snake didn't have a choice. It was created for a purpose, and it does what it's supposed to do, which makes it perfect, and at least perfect to God's plan. Whereas we have the free will, and the choices we make as a whole, mankind is making us more evil, or not really evil. Evil is kind of a strong word there, but mankind as a whole isn't it might not be considered a huge success on a moral scale there. So I kind of like that as a theme as well. A couple of the other themes that was brought out was how the simplicity of excuse me, the simplicity of the snake, and we'll see why it says that there. But when we get the description of it, it's a simple creature, with various, no arms, no legs, things like that, versus man and all the complexity we've brought to the table, all the things that we've done, all these kind of things. Definitely see the conflict there, and that simplicity is what makes the snake better than mankind. Just some things to think about there, and I'm sure there's plenty of others that I didn't see or didn't think of myself. And you may see yourself there. However, we'll go ahead and read through the poem here, and as we do, I'm assuming everybody's read it at least once, so I'm not going to do this big long reading and then go back into it. We'll break it down as we go there. We may go through it twice, depending on how much I get out in the first time there. We'll see. Excuse me here. Let me get some water. So right off the bat, we get God to the Serpent is our title, and like I said before, you see the speaker is God. So immediately the word everything that's being said is being said from God's mouth. And I took this from a slight Christian point of view. And I didn't grab the Bible out and reference anything like that. However, we're talking about God, and He's talking to the serpent, with a snake, and so that immediately gave me a Christian overtone to it there. I never read it before, so my immediate thought when I read the title was, is he going to condemn the snake for the things that he's done, or all this negativity there? And as you'll see, that's not quite the case here. Let's get started. Beloved snake, perhaps my finest blueprint. How can I not take pride in your design? And right there, right off the bat, we got beloved snake. Beloved, one of a term of endearment. Perhaps my finest blueprint. And God made the snake. I personally, I never really thought about how God did do that. Being that we typically associate a snake with evil or the devil or Lucifer or something like that. But God made those things. He made all the good things that we associate things with and the bad. And in this case, He's saying that it's perhaps it's my finest blueprint. How can I not take pride in your design? I mean, that just immediately brings a bit of sublime to the snake. I mean, if God came down and spoke to you personally and said, "Hey, you're amazing. I love you," or "Hey, good job," even imagine that's like a high-end compliment. You're not going to get much better than that, and that brings that sublime in there. Your passage without hoof or paw or shoe print revels in art and nature's S-curve line. And right here, we're talking about the S-curve line. I know when we were talking about William Blake in class, we talked about the symmetry, and my post and a couple other people have pointed out how symmetry is considered one of the beauties of the world, like perfect symmetry, and an S is a mark of that symmetry to a degree. And also, it doesn't mention the yin-yang here, but this is part where I get the duality from. In a yin-yang, I actually drew one here just to kind of, and I'm excuse my art, but you got that S right there that separates the good and the bad, or the black and the white, or the two opposing forces there. And that's kind of where I see this. I mean, you got God talking to the serpent, which is a dual, in a modern standpoint, that is the good and evil, right there together. And that S-curve line would be what separated it. And that is how the snake travels. I mean, if you've ever seen a snake travel, it doesn't go straight like a worm almost. It gives you that S there, that symmetry. No ears, no whiskers, fingers, legs, or teeth. No cries, complaints, nor curses from you start. But silence shares your body in its sheath, full functioning with no superfluous parts. And right here, I mean, he's literally comparing it to every other animal. aside from the worm, which is the only animal I could possibly think of that's, inhabiting Earth on a scale, like that we see and whatnot, where they don't have any limbs whatsoever. Nothing. Like it mentions here, no ears, no whiskers, fingers, legs, or tails. And it's, and from the very beginning, the snake, it's not complaining, it's silence. And here it says, silence shares your body in its sheath. The sheath is, I never would have thought of using it as a cover for a snake or something. It's usually for a blade or a sword or something dangerous, which is what a snake would be. I mean, some snake, you got the rattlesnake that has the rattler on the end, but most snakes don't really give you a lot of warning or say something, make a sound before they attack. And then you also have a good use of alliteration there. You have a lot of the, curses, start, silent, shares, sheath, superfluous. That alliteration definitely, represents the snake there. Moving on here, we got men try to emulate your forked tongue, which, this is where it changes. The tone starts to change. In the first two stanzas we had, it's praising the snake. And here, men try to emulate your forked tongue, their prideful piece dwarfed by your lordly length. 2 arms for blows or hugging loosely hung are mocked by boa constrictor's single strength. And here it starts to shift. I mean, we were talking about the snake, and now we're talking about the, men and how they're not the same, the difference between the two. Trying to emulate their forked tongue, whereas men, the forked tongue being a symbol for doing one thing and saying another, and the snake, it doesn't say anything, it just has that tongue there. And then their prideful piece dwarfed by your lordly length, it makes me think of the Garden of Eden once again. Adam was embarrassed once he got the knowledge that he was naked. His piece was showing there, to put it mildly, to put it appropriately here. And a lot of men talk. We don't call it a dick measuring contest for nothing. And then the snake though is much longer than that. It's kind of what it's going. It's just kind of like showing how the snake's better. 2 arms for blows or hugging, which is kind of that duality again. Because, blows being punches, kick, fighting, or hugging, something, an embrace. And it just once again shows that duality, of man and snake. And the and the snake comes in with, how it mocks, man with a, single strength. And that boa constrictor, it just wraps around it. It creates that same, we hug, but and our hug means well, but if a snake starts wrapping around you and starts constricting on you, it's going to kill you. So it goes back to that duality again. How dare men claim their image as my own, with all those limbs and features sticking out? You, snake, with continuity of bone, need but a spine to coil and cruise about. And it goes back again, just what's wrong with man? It's saying that, that's where the complexity comes in. We got all these features and all these different things to do all these different things. And a snake is just, a single line that happens to be able to do all these things as well. And that's another spot where I feel like it's just pushing to how great the snake is, and it again gives it that sublime nature, because like my pencil here, like I held up, if this thing started just going across the room on its own or something, it would be absolutely amazing. If I laid it down, I'm not, if I just laid it here on the desk, it's not going anywhere like that on its own. It's going to need a piece of force to go with it, whereas the snake can just travel. And then, men fear the force of your hypnotic eyes. Make myths to damn your being wise and deft. You, snake, not men, deserve my cosmic prize. I'm glad you stayed in Eden when they left. And I wasn't really sure about the hypnotic eyes. I knew only thing I heard about it was from the Jungle Book, Disney's cartoon. And I looked into it a little bit more, and it's actually said, thought that the eyes are what catches its prey, before they strike. The critter it's going after will freeze, waiting for it to blink or something, and they just don't blink before, and they don't even have eyelids, and that draws in their prey. And it talks about men fear that force, and men do fear the force of being caught off guard, or being paralyzed, like a deer in the headlights or a rabbit in a snake's eye, something like that. And then, make myths to damn your being wise and deft. And that goes back to what I was saying in the very beginning. When we think of a snake, we think of it as evil. We blame it for the garden, that Eve taking that first bite in the Garden of Eden. We blame the snake, as if it's a bad thing, as if it wasn't just doing what it was supposed to do, as if, God didn't create it. And we do. I mean, when people talk about snakes, they just say bad things about them. You, snake, not men, deserve my cosmic prize. I'm glad you stayed in Eden when they left. And one thing about that strikes me there is, it says, I'm glad you stayed when they left. In the Bible, God cast Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. So it's pointing out, it's saying this as if they had a choice. So when you go back and think about it, they did have a choice originally. Eve had a choice, do I take the bite or do I not? Adam also had that same choice, do I take that bite or do I not? So they did make the choice to get kicked out. No different than if, right now I choose to submit this, go down to the local 7-Eleven or something like that, rob it, and then get myself arrested. I made the choice to go do that, which caused me to get arrested. Let's see here. Anything else I wanted to point out before we go here? I'm not going to read it a second time. Just going to cover the stanzas there. The first one we talked about, how, just be loving the snake, and that, that symmetry there, and how beautiful and sublime the snake is because of it. And then, I called that, the way I broke the stanzas down was, stanza 1 was God's just happy with the snake. He loves it. The snake's amazing. And then stanza 2, we see how the snake doesn't need all the complexity of man. It doesn't need that to fulfill what it's doing. It doesn't need features. It doesn't need whiskers, things like that. And then that alliteration was definitely there. And then in stanza 3, it's the introduction of man. Freaking, excuse me, that forked tongue, how man just isn't doing it correctly. The prideful piece and that masculinity that we take, pride is a masculine feature, when you write it out, in literature and whatnot. It's definitely a trait of man. You don't have animals that take on pride, Whenever people are dressing their dogs up, the dog can't, doesn't experience the shame that maybe it should. Just kidding for anybody that actually does that. And then stanza 4, it's God's disgust with man. And I think that comes from, the previous thing there. I mean, look, we have all this pride. We made all these bad choices. We do all of these things there. And then, number 5, the stanza 5 would just go back into how, the choices of man have caused it to be this way. Maybe God wouldn't have had this same talk right after Garden of Eden, but now it has this talk now that he's seeing what the world's become. And, I definitely, would like some feedback. So this will be on YouTube, so you can comment on there. Or, if you're in the class, you can comment on, where I post this in the discussion topics there. I definitely would like the feedback and get what you guys think. Thank you for taking time with me. Have a great day.